Welcome to Norse Co., the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, and it has been 1,211 days since the last butt fumble. I'm joined by, actually, the laughter you hear in the background is our in-house analyst and Vikings blogger extraordinaire, who is functionally cornering the entire Vikings podcast market. Apparently, there's a new one with you and Andy and Luke Inman.
Well, I can't corner it any better than Andy does. He just brought me into one of his 18 projects.
Wow, that is a very Hollywood answer, I will say. At any rate, useful human Arif Hassan joins us as per usual. This week we have a very special guest. You may know him as at NFL Draft Scout on Twitter. He is also known by his meat space name, Matt Miller. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm a fan from afar, so this is pretty cool for me.
Oh, cool for you? Come on. That is even more Hollywood somehow.
That was a little too flattering to be believable, Matt.
Well, I've been practicing that line all day, so.
Yeah. All right. Let's just get to the show. We'll talk promotional stuff later, but Matt is much like a deer in that if we frighten him, he will leap away, never to be seen again. So I would like to specifically, pin you down on your thoughts about some Vikings, free agency moves. But I guess first, maybe we can talk about your scouting process. Does that seem like a good place to start? Maybe a little bit about you and kind of how you do business.
Sure. Yeah. We can start wherever you guys want. I'm pretty much an open book when it comes to how I do things, why I do them, and the fact that it might not be the best way to do things. It's just how I learned or how I've kind of evolved over the years. So fire away, and I'll answer as honestly as possible.
Sure. Well, let's actually go into sort of how you got into this whole process. You shared a bunch of tidbits over Twitter and stuff. I obviously haven't seen all of them, but you had, I think, another website that you were blogging at. You also sent scouting reports, I think, to all 32 teams, if I remember correctly. Sometimes you even got feedback from those teams on, maybe you were focusing too much on production and stuff like that. But how did you get started scouting just first?
Yeah, that's you're going back to high school. Man, maybe even junior high school. I just loved the draft. I have a younger brother, and we are really close. And that was our thing, was watching the NFL draft every year. Back when it was just Saturday and Sunday, we would camp out in the living room all weekend and watch the draft. So it was the perfect marriage between college football and the NFL, which were my two favorite things in the world at that time. So it just hooked me for whatever reason. Probably like everyone who's listening to this who loves the draft, it's just you can't even remember why you fell in love with it. You just did. I loved playing football, but I was a pretty average player at a really small school in Southwest Missouri. So I realized that
you weren't slated for a D1 program until
I was not. No, I'm not gonna lie to you. I wasn't even slated for an MIAA program. I was a decent high school player. I was small, so I knew I had some limitations, but I loved football. So my sophomore year of high school, my journalism teacher was like, "Hey, you're a good writer. You should join the newspaper staff here and cover the games that you're playing in and cover the other sports too." And I did it and just fell in love with it. I loved writing about football.
That you were playing in?
Yeah, that's what's hilarious because it actually worked well because I played receiver and free safety. So I had a unique perspective of what happened during the game. So, I would come in Monday morning and write my little post-game article, and it was unique, and it was actually really popular because it was okay, here's why we got beat, or here's why we were able to win, instead of just here's the box score. So even as
digs it, and he'd if it wasn't for the dirty play of so and so.
Yeah, well, if number 23 had been playing running back all game, we would have won. No, I didn't set myself up or anything like that. I should have in hindsight, but that's how I got started writing. And then when the internet boom kind of took off, that's when I found a website called NFL Draft Blitz, and it was back in the forum days, no Twitter. So I would get on their message board and just post all the time. And They brought me on to write a little bit, and that's really how I got my start as like a draft analyst. And from there, I coached high school football, made some connections, ended up coaching minor league football, made the right connections there, started scouting for the Arena League, scouted for a CFL team for a little bit before I couldn't move to Canada, so it was like a short-term type of consulting thing. But that kind of gave me a little bit of credibility. I think at least, in my opinion, it helps a little bit. But that was kind of how I learned how to scout, was through those experiences. And you mentioned the thing about I sent a draft guide to all 32 teams. I FedEx envelope, signature required to every general manager in the NFL, with a note, like a cover letter of, hey, I'd like to break into scouting. Here are my thoughts. Here's my phone number. Here's my email address. And surprisingly, quite a few of them reached out. Charlie Casserly, we developed a really good relationship. This was when he was in Houston. Michael Lombardi was in Oakland. I learned a lot from these guys just by talking on the phone. Bill Polian was in Indianapolis. I actually thought they were going to offer me a job at one point. Like I was going to go to Indianapolis. Was like ready to interview, and then they filled their staff, and it was like, he and I were talking on the phone often, and I really thought, like, here's my break. So. I had a daughter when I was a senior in high school, so it all worked out well for me. But I wasn't like a lot of these young guys now who can, like, what I always tell people: if you're 23 and want to be a scout, you need to be prepared to not get paid for 2 years. You're going to do an internship for 2 years and not get paid. I couldn't do that. I had bills to pay. I had child support to pay, so I kind of came in the back door on all this. But it seems to have worked out okay.
Cool. Well, so all of that entire process, you bring your history with you sort of wherever you go. That probably is informed, like, how you look at players today, those conversations you had with, like, Polian and Casserly and Lombardi. When you look at a player, and I know that you try not to look at players who haven't declared yet, obviously not an issue right now, but when you are looking at a player, say in October, right, and you want to put together a scouting notebook or something, and say like Corey Coleman, for example, was immensely productive at the time. His quarterback was his quarterback and not, a third string whoever. And before you watch this game that, production statistics for a program like Baylor in the Big 12 can kind of skew things. But you also know, Corey Coleman's a good player. How do you look at that, knowing that you've got sort of all of these sort of limitations or problems with the scouting process as it applies to this team, or Georgia Tech, they've got a system makes it difficult to evaluate wide receivers, whatever. How do you go into that scouting process just watching, say, in October?
Well, I always say this, and I'm consistent, so I hope people believe me, that I honestly don't look at production. Like, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you how many catches Corey Coleman had last year or how many touchdowns or anything like that. I'm awful about it. I know there are some people who are on the other end of the spectrum. Like, they look at that first, and that's what they can tell you about. But I consider myself to be a trait-based evaluator. Like, I try to take the player out of that system completely. And so I actually have a list of quarterback traits, wide receiver traits, running back traits, and that's what I look for. I look for those traits, and it's the scouting reports that I fill out for myself, not the ones that we post online. And they're like the old school, style of, here are his athletic traits, his toughness, his mental traits, his, overall athleticism, strength, hands. And I do pros and cons for those traits. So production is a part of that. It's down there with, like, I'm looking at my quarterback list right now because it was in front of me. It's right there by mechanics. I look at production. So, you definitely have to take note of it because you can have all the traits in the world and not produce. And that's obviously a big red flag. You can be that guy. But I try to just look at, can this guy play? Because what I have found, and I've missed badly on some players because I looked at what they did in college and not what their athleticism or toughness or technique says they can do it at the NFL. And I think for me, that's where I've missed the most in my career, is by over betting on production instead of, let's take the guy who is going to be able to handle the speed at the next level, or like the receivers, like Corey Coleman, amazing production compared to Michael Thomas, who didn't have that production. But Michael Thomas played with quarterbacks who could only throw a deep ball, or were more running backs than quarterbacks. So it gets into a tough scenario where how much emphasis do you really want to put on those numbers when I can just watch those two guys play and tell you which one I like better based off his explosion off the line of scrimmage, how he handles the ball in the air, his route running ability. And I think for me, with receivers, where production comes in more is drops versus touchdowns. Like, that's a big thing for me, because if you're going to drop the ball, you better do something with it when you catch it. Like Will Fuller and Corey Coleman, ton of drops, but a ton of touchdowns. So that's probably the biggest area where I do actually trust the numbers a little bit.
Sure. And then do you ever find yourself, falling in love with a prospect that, their production is just awful? And you find yourself maybe not in a scouting report, but maybe when you talk about this player, say in a podcast or in your scouting notebook or whatever, kind of like trying to defend their production, like maybe not so much like a defensive tackle who doesn't get sacks. That's like a pretty easy one to defend. But like, a quarterback whose yards per attempt or total yards or whatever is just bad. But they've got like all these traits. You're like, this is a great, second day pick or whatever. And you're like, well, they've only passed for 1,000 yards. How could you possibly pick this quarterback? Like, do you find yourself like getting preemptively defensive about their production, knowing that these traits are really good?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I think I'm fighting that fight with Christian Hackenberg this year because production it's been bad the last 2014 was really bad. 2015, I thought he made some positive steps, but you can go back to his freshman year and he looked like Carson Palmer. So he's that guy that's interesting. Like you said, I have a round 3 grade on him, so we're not talking first round pick, but definitely a player where you start to make the excuse of, Vikings fans will appreciate this because I do the same thing for Teddy Bridgewater. You automatically bring up, well, listen, that offensive line is awful. He has nobody to throw to. What is the scheme they're running? Like, what? Come on, it's 2016. You're running that? So my Christian Hackenberg argument, you could just switch Teddy Bridgewater's name in and out of that, and it would sound exactly the same.
All right, so Christian Hackenberg is Teddy Bridgewater.
Oh, great. Yeah, there's your headline, which is not what I mean at all. But Teddy is my number one player in 2014. Hackenberg's probably like 90 right now. So, but I think Hackenberg, if you are, like I said, I think I'm a trait-based evaluator. You can look at his arm strength and you can look at his size and his toughness, and he's a super, super smart player. Like those are things that are kind of harder to find. And coaches all have egos, and I never coached at a high level, but I coached enough to see guys and think, okay, you could probably fix some of these problems. And if you can fix enough of them, you have a steal.
So do you find yourself so I know Matt Waldman is really big on this weighted checklist idea, and it's worked out pretty fantastically for him. Do you find yourself sort of thinking about things in terms of that weighted checklist? Like you're like, well, maybe not exactly like arm strength is worth like 10 points, but like you find yourself thinking like, well, so he doesn't check these boxes, but this box that he checks is just so important that it's it is what it is, and I'll give him a much better grade than maybe somebody who just wants every box checked.
Yeah, I think I've definitely looked at Matt Waldman is a much smarter human being than I am. He's able to put these really complex ideas in like cool little phrases, and you're like, damn it, why didn't I think of that? So I've never been able to characterize it as weight-based scouting, but I definitely think that makes sense because whether it's a quarterback or a receiver, there are areas that I look at. And I think the way that when I put a number grade on a player, like if they have 3 elite traits, they're probably a first rounder. If they have 2, they're probably a second rounder. If they have 1, they're probably a third rounder. So it definitely comes into play, probably not in the exact same way that he does, but it's definitely something that I look at. And I think every evaluator, whether you're doing it for the media, for fun, or for an NFL team, you have to be looking at that because ultimately we're just trying to find the best football players and the guys who have the highest upside. So if you have a player like Jared Goff who maybe doesn't have the biggest arm, he's not the biggest guy, he's like 215 pounds, small hands. But if you really value poise and accuracy and football IQ, well, you're going to really like him. So I definitely think I do the same thing.
Sure. Well, let's pivot a little bit to talk about stuff that's happening now, like the draft and the Vikings. This is a Vikings podcast, so before we get into questions about specific players in the draft, let's talk about how the Vikings have done this offseason. I know that you do these power rankings as much as sometimes it's pulling teeth to have to do them, and so you have to keep an eye on sort of everything that all of these teams do, especially during a hectic period like free agency. The Vikings made a lot of moves. They just got Andre Smith. They also have Alex Boone. They got Michael Griffin. They also got some death signings like Travis Lewis, Emmanuel Moore. So how do you think of, maybe not great, but how do you think of overall how the Vikings have done in free agency? And second question that built off of that, how do you think this changes the draft priorities?
Well, I like what they've done in free agency, and I think free agency informs the draft for smart teams. Free agency, you're trying to fill needs. In the draft, you're trying to add talent. So I like what they've done. As a closet Vikings fan, I'm very happy about the fact that they've addressed the offensive line, especially with Alex Boone. Having grown up a 49ers fan, I'm really familiar with his play. He's physical, he's tough, he's versatile. He can play right guard, left guard, right tackle. But I think he's going to add some meanness to that line that's really been missing. And with Andre Smith, that's going to be an interesting battle, I think, at right tackle between he and Phil Lodeholt. But I see him as an upgrade. Just, player to player, I think he's an upgrade. So my biggest complaint watching them last year, first and foremost, was the offensive line. And I know a lot of excuses were made for injuries and problems there. But the offensive line, to me, is better today than it was when the season ended. So that's a big positive. And how that informs the draft is, now they're at the end of the first round, they're not forced to draft an offensive lineman. So you can start to look at, okay, here are our team needs. When we come on the board at pick 23, they can look at wide receiver, they can look at weak side linebacker, they can look at strong safety. So they're not just put into that box of, like a team like Seattle is right now, or Carolina, where it's like, oh my God, we have to get a tackle. Like we have to find someone who can help our quarterback out. So I'm a big fan of how they've addressed this. And I think on defense, getting like a little more, maybe that takes care of that weak side linebacker spot. Maybe Michael Griffin and the re-signing of Sendejo will be enough at safety to where, they're set up. If this was the roster you rolled with in week one, you're still going to win a lot of games. I still think that this is a really good, really talented team. Now, the one area they haven't addressed in free agency, and I'm sure everyone is aware of, is wide receiver. And that is by far the biggest need on this team. Like, I think they have to add probably two of them between now and when the season starts.
Fair enough. So this thought's been rolling around in my head. I mentioned it on the other podcast that I'm on. And I know that you were scouting him when he was coming out. He's in the same class as Phil Lodeholt, Andre Smith. He was a left tackle at Alabama for 3 years. He has a lot of the same strengths and weaknesses as Phil Lodeholt, which pigeonholes both of them as right tackles. But, there's a lot of talk right now that, fundamentally in terms of importance, that, right tackle and left tackle, the contracts, show a difference in importance, but like the play and the impact that it has on quarterbacks, there's really not much difference. Do you, and I know this is kind of weird, do you think that there should be an opportunity for Andre Smith to compete with Matt Khalil at left tackle? Because he gave up a lot of pressure at left tackle anyway, and I know Andre Smith has some issues with speed rushers, and on the left side that that's a lot of problems for a lot of people. But what are your thoughts on that?
I would definitely try it. I don't think there's any harm in putting him over there and trying it and seeing what he can do. Now, it's definitely not something he's done much, if at all, in the NFL, just going off memory. But he definitely showed that ability at Alabama. My thing that I would say is he has to be in shape. Like, that's been an issue with him. And it's like, okay, yeah, we all saw him at the combine with the shirt off running, and that was a mistake. He shouldn't have done that. But in the NFL, like, he struggled with conditioning a little bit. So I think that would be the key is, are we going to get this guy at 320? Are we going to get him at 335? Are we going to get him at 350? Like, where's he coming in at? Because I think when he's on point, he definitely has the athleticism to do that, but it's been all over the map for him. So, you can look back at like what he did in 2012, 2013. He was tremendous. He was one of the best right tackles in the game. So if he can get back to that level, then I definitely think that let him compete, because the jury's out on Matt Khalil still. Sure. There's a little bit of time left to see what he can do, but I think it's a pretty mixed bag right now of the guy who has flashes of, okay, here's the player we drafted top 5 overall, and then there are games where it's like, we got to get rid of this guy right now. And
is the jury really still out on him?
Good example of that.
I deleted just now like 5 or 6 mailbag questions about like, who do we get to replace Matt Khalil? Like, is the jury still really like out on him?
I think it. Well, maybe from a national perspective, I guess it's out on him on if he's a starting left tackle. I should say it that way. Now,
Sure.
I thought he was a little better last year. You know what? I think he cut his sacks in half, if I'm remembering right. We just did this for the NFL 1000 thing, so I think that he got better there. But how much of that is Bridgewater getting rid of the ball quickly and things like that? I don't think the scheme helps them up front at all because God, there's so many 5 and 7 step drops, and that's just not the NFL these days. But I'm one of those people. I think you have to admit your misses on players and move on. And right now, I don't know how you guys feel, so I may be on my own here. I just don't see Matt Khalil as being a long-term answer at left tackle.
Well, I mean, you've been basically speaking sort of the gospel of Vikings apologist Twitter, which I am a huge member of. So don't worry about that. So right before we get in the mailbag, just a real quick question on Teddy Bridgewater. What do you think is the biggest weakness that he can work on? So maybe it's not the deep ball, maybe that's always a problem, but what's the biggest weakness that he can work on in order to take the next step?
I think the deep ball can get better. I really do. I think that's like you can't really improve your accuracy a ton, but you can get better at the deep ball, and I think that is something that he has to get confidence with. But I also think that he has to have a receiver he's confident in throwing to down the field. So it's not just like Teddy can't throw deep. He doesn't want to sometimes. And if you look at, thank God Mike Wallace is gone, because if I have to watch him underrun another deep ball, I'm going to lose it and start throwing things at my TV. So I'm so happy that happened and that he can go ruin someone else for a few years. But what can Teddy get better? Sorry, I went on a little Vikings-esque rant there. I think just getting that comfort level, the confidence that he had at Louisville he had so much swagger as a quarterback, especially his last 2 years at Louisville. It was like this guy was unbeatable. So I think just having the confidence that when he walks to the line of scrimmage, that he can make the changes he wants to the play, that he can the offense is his. And I don't know anything in terms of rumors or whatever, but it just looks to me like he doesn't have that yet. Like this offense doesn't feel like it's his. So I don't know on the field if that's gonna translate to on the field. So I would love to see him start to sling it downfield more, but I think that's only going to come if he has someone who can actually go down the field and make those contested catches.
All right. Well, so we should have a pretty hefty mailbag. I imagine there's a lot of draft wide receiver questions in there, which will probably be the focus of what people want to talk about. So, Dusty, did you grab any of those questions?
I went through the mailbag and cleaned it up like Brazilian cattle farmers have cleaned up the rainforest.
Oh, thanks for that, Dusty.
Enrique Malin writes us via email. We'd love to hear discussion with Matt on how much luck factors in when it comes to a prospect becoming a successful player. Luck is in getting into a good situation with a team and a coach. For example, say that Aaron Rodgers was drafted by the Browns, probably not be the player that he is today. And although this is not a specific question about a wide receiver, I think it's very relevant to that point in the sense that, we were just talking about how, and I think you're right, Matt. I think the Vikings offense doesn't feel like a Teddy Bridgewater offense, and we really have no idea what that would even look like for reasons previously discussed. But, given your thoughts that we should be drafting at least 2 wide receivers of some import, what impact do you think luck will have on that process?
I think it's a big part of it. I mean, you can watch every game a guy plays in. You can spend an hour talking to him. You can watch his workouts, read his medicals. Luck is going to come into it, and somewhat because you just never know how a guy's going to respond to adversity or being a millionaire. Like, you never know. So there's definitely some luck with that. I think you kind of touched this early in their question, I think, was situation is so important, and something I've always wanted to do, but I've never had time is after the draft, you would almost like re-rank players based on their situation. Like, I was not a big Kelvin Benjamin fan until he got drafted by Carolina. And then it was like, This is the best possible spot for this kid. It raises his value. It makes him a better prospect because of that offense, because of the quarterback that they have there. So I think luck plays into it, but situation is a big part of it. And, as that relates to receivers, I've been pretty outspoken about, like, I want the Vikings to go after a physical receiver who can also stretch the field, and that narrows the list a lot. So picking one of those guys, there's definitely some luck involved in, getting the Amari Cooper out of that and not the A.J. Jenkins.
All right, then let me combine a couple of the wide receiver questions into one. Where'd it go? All right. Jordan Wright at Skull J Wright writes us chances of taking Jalen Smith at 23. I guess that's maybe not a wide receiver question, but
that's tough. I'm a huge fan of Jalen Smith. It's such a wait and see with him because of the knee. Where he's at now. I spoke to his trainer a few days ago, and they were like, "We would love to tell you something new, but we don't know. We're just waiting to see how the knee responds." So, if you think Jalen Smith's going to play in 2017 and be 100%, I would absolutely draft him at 23 and just start telling people in a year we're going to have the best linebacking core in the NFL. Come get us, like have fun, because if he's healthy, he is a beast, and he can do everything. He can play weak side, he can play middle. He can put his hand in the dirt and rush on third downs. Like, he is tremendous. I watched him play Texas. I watched him spy a running quarterback. I watched him cover slot receivers. I saw him chasing the ball to the sideline. His run fits were solid in the middle. Like, he would be the best player in this draft if he were healthy. So if the doctors there feel like he's going to be back on the field, he's absolutely a good pick there.
You feel like maybe the medical is so wide open because there's the potential for nerve damage that he could be drafted anywhere between the first round and the seventh round, right?
Without a doubt, yeah. And it's tough because I feel like the public perception has all been pushed in one way. It's all he's never going to play again, instead of we don't really know, which is I'm not a doctor. I don't know if either of you are doctors, but that seems like the responsible thing to say to me is we really don't know. None of us evaluated him. None of us have seen his charts. Let's just kind of wait and see what's going to happen with this kid. But you're right. He could go anywhere from top 10 to undrafted. And right now, that's like the worst answer to give because it doesn't say a whole lot, but that's the truth.
All right. So let's talk Josh Doctson. Soren Hansen at Soren Hansen 2 writes, how big of a red flag is Doctson's age? There's a question from Christopher Wiley. Actually, no. First, we'll include the question from Wyatt Holtzclaw at Wyatt James 4. Why does anyone think NFL secondaries won't be able to stop Doctson's one and only trick?
He can jump, and that's.
I'm assuming that's his one and only trick.
Yeah, I assume it's the jumping.
And Christopher Wyatt, he is a talented jumper. Christopher Wiley at the Dr. Wiley writes. In the context of the Vikings, do you agree with the Reef's assessment of Michael Thomas over Josh Doctson?
I'll start with Josh Doctson. I do worry about the age, and not from a perspective of, okay, he's going to be 29, when he gets done with his first contract. You don't care about that because if you're an NFL team, you don't know if you're going to get this guy in a second contract. So you look at it from a perspective of how good is he going to be while we have him. That's all we worry about. Where I look at the age question is, imagine Allen Robinson or Amari Cooper playing in college and just how freaking dominant they would be. And how much of that is because you're older? I can remember being like 21 and going back and playing basketball with high school kids and just being able to do whatever I wanted to them because you're just stronger. You understand your body more. You're physically more mature. So that's where I look at it is how much of an advantage does Doctson have by being 23 and he's playing 18-year-olds. So I that's where the question comes into me. It's not about how long is he going to last in the NFL because I don't think that matters a whole lot. Now, as far as Michael Thomas goes, he's my number one receiver in this class. I think he's special with like a capital S. He's good, and he's a tough evaluation because you watch him for 2 years and that offense did him no favors. But he's smart, he's fast, he's strong. He's 6'3", 215, but he can make people miss in space. Everyone saw him kill Kendall Fuller's leg. He does that routinely. He did it against Notre Dame, too. So he is I'm a huge fan of his. If somehow he's on the board when they come up, I'm going to call and beg everyone I know in Minnesota to make him the pick.
I mean, I'm way on your side about this. I'm a huge fan of Michael Thomas. So I think, So I think the biggest question for the Vikings in terms of finding a wide receiver fit is the contested catch thing. So I don't think that Doctson only has one trick. It's just a very obvious one. So do you want to talk about what makes Doctson special aside from his ability to play basketball?
Sure, yeah, and I just wrote him up last week, so this is all pretty fresh for me. He is strong at the catch point because of that leaping ability, but he's also probably has some of the best hands in this class. Like when he's not making the circus catch, like he tracks the ball really cleanly. He looks it in. For being kind of a leaner framed guy, very high waisted, he's still capable of being explosive, especially out of his breaks. Now that offense didn't ask him to run a ton of routes. It wasn't a very developed route tree, but he ran over the middle. He had, a lot of post, a lot of hitches, and he definitely has that ability to throttle down and then explode and get into space. So I'm a big fan of that. I do think that the leaping ability is a huge trait for him because, especially in the red zone, you need guys like that. And he's 6'2", 200 pounds, so he has that smaller wide receiver ability underneath. But then he brings that amazing vert, and it changes the game. It opens him up to a whole new level. You get inside the red zone where everything gets tight. He brings that extra ability. So I think he's an X receiver. I think he can play on the outside. I think he could start early on. I guess my biggest questions would be just that, how much of his dominance at TCU is scheme and how much is because he's an older guy. But he's a good route runner. He has really good vision with the ball in his hands. Super productive. He's not afraid of traffic. So there are a lot of positives for Josh Doctson. I know I see on Twitter all the time, people love this kid, like talking about he's the best receiver in the class. And you watch his highlights, and you can definitely make that argument.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we'll let you go, Matt. Thanks for being on the show, by the way. You're killing it. Keep it up. Judd Zolgad's hoodie writes us with 2 questions. 1, can you replace Arif full-time? And actually 3 questions. 2, if Arif asked you to adopt him, would you? And 3, what is the dumbest question a troll on Twitter has ever asked you other than those 2?
Okay, first one. I would love to replace him full time. Let's talk contract. I can forward you my people's information. We'll hammer that out.
I have a Lego figurine of Christian Ponder that I can send you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need some diversity in Southwest Missouri. So I would love to adopt you, and you could go to school with my daughter where they say that global warming is fake, and a lot of Donald Trump supporters down here. So that would be
Harvard of the Midwest. So that sounds exactly like what you're saying.
Exactly. Third question, the dumbest question I've ever got. I get this all the time. I'll post a link to a mock draft or a big board, and someone will reply to that and be like, "Hey, when's that mock draft coming out?" I'm like, are you freaking serious? Like, so I get that all the time. You get the obvious ones where somebody could like Google their tweet and get the answer they're looking for, which maybe it's because I'm 32 and I don't understand teenagers anymore. But like, why don't you just Google what you just
text box you could write that same sentence into?
Help yourself a little bit here. So that one, that is the one where I'm like punching my desk because like, why do you? And they don't give up. Like they'll keep asking you. I'll get like some guy will ask 5 times in a row, and it's like, okay, here's the answer.
Well, that's that. It turns out that is the price you pay for being Twitter famous. You attract a lot of really like special with a capital S stupid.
That is true. It's a blessing and a curse all at the same time.
Well, as long as the blessing part outweighs the curse part. Okay, last question from Andrew Renshin at InfraRen. I know you've been a Blue Moon guy in the past, Matt, but as a fellow beer geek, what are you on these days?
Oh, yeah, I did go through that Blue Moon phase. I forgot about that.
It's a phase, so you're over it.
Yeah, you and Peter King. I mean, actually, no, Peter King was Shock Top. Never mind.
Yeah, if there's one on tap, like every now and then I'll have one. But we have a great brewery, here, Boulevard. So whatever Boulevard brew is on tap is usually what I'll go with.
Tank 7 is so good. Tank 7 might be one of the best 10 beers in America.
Tank 7's great. They have a KC Pils that's like a good lighter beer as well. 80 Acre is really, really good wheat beer. So Boulevard I've been kind of staying right around there. I think I went out a couple weeks ago and had like a Widmer Hefeweizen, which was pretty solid. So I try to stay like more in the the wheats and the Belgian type beers, but I'm also like a borderline alcoholic. If you put it in front of me, I'll probably drink it. So I'm not too picky.
That Abbey back about with you in the sunglasses drinking.
Oh, the Crown Royal Abbey? Yeah, I should. Oh, but when I posted that, I had so many people who like were tell me I was unprofessional and I should be fired.
Oh, because you had to steal your wife, Abby? Come on.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, you do what you got to do to get the job done, right? Like that's
exactly. Yeah.
the end of the day. Okay, so I do have a follow-up question. Do you guys have access to Oscar Blues beers?
No, I don't think we do.
Oh man, they're a Colorado brewery that has been like, so you guys get New Belgium, right? Like Fat Tire and Sunshine Wheat and stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
So Oscar Blues is like a better version of New Belgium. They're from Lyons, Colorado, and not Fort Collins. But all their beer is sold in cans, and
nice.
It's the best canned beer you can buy that is not made by Surly.
I was about to mention Surly, yeah.
So if you get a chance, check out any Oscar Blues offerings at your liquor store if they become available. I was really hoping that we had crossed the Mississippi, but beer distribution being what it is, apparently we haven't.
I'm on that side of the Mississippi. I'm good. So if it's in Colorado, I'm on that side.
But you're like right next to it though, right? Like
I'm in western Missouri. I'm almost in Kansas. So
okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
so I'm closer to you guys than you realize, which sounds very creepy.
Oh, God, he's right behind me.
Ah, God, there he is. Oh, man. Well, this has been great, Matt. It's been a pleasure having you on. You're welcome anytime, as long as you are comfortable with being, like, outed as a Vikings fan. You won't be able to stay in the closet if
they hadn't drafted Teddy, he would not be here.
That's probably true. That is true. But the year before that, I loved their draft too. So once Rick Spielman came in, it was kind of started to take notice of like, okay, this guy, I think he runs a team like I would, just super aggressive and going after athletes. And Anthony Barr is one of my favorite players in the league. So there were a lot of pieces there even before Teddy. He was just kind of the very sweet icing on top of the cake
for you. All right, that's fair.
Well, excellent. Well, you are welcome back anytime. We would love to have you on. You can follow Matt on Twitter if you don't already. It seems like half of the civilized world already does, but he is at NFL Draft Scout. Do you have any side projects or interesting things that you would like to plug?
I don't have time for side projects, unfortunately. What I'm working on right now, I can tell you that is the NFL Draft 400 series. It's grading and writing up full scouting reports on the top 400 players in the draft. I've just finished the quarterbacks today and rolling into the running backs tomorrow. So it will start coming out early April and run through the month right up until the draft.
Oh, that sounds non-controversial. It should be fun.
And when it comes out, feel free to berate Matt on Twitter by reply asking him when it's going to come out.
Exactly.
Matt Miller, what a guy. So, gosh, now we still have to podcast. Like I didn't realize we would only have him for 30 minutes. Like this is not my most prepared day ever, but luckily Mike Wallace decided to throw some shade at Teddy Bridgewater on his way out.
It's true. Now we have endless time to talk about this.
Well, not endless, but it's a good start.
Virtually endless.
Well. So, dude, what is his deal? Like, the obvious implication is that Teddy Bridgewater can't throw the deep ball.
Well, right. Well, it was so ridiculous. So first, before we talk about the rest of this, so Mike Wallace, he walked it back in a USA Today article a day later, obviously after he earned some criticism for it. But, he said multiple times, so he said, like, directly, I knew I wasn't coming back to Minnesota. I said I needed a good quarterback, right? And so there's a clearly direct implication here. And I think, some people are like, well, you're reading too much into this. And, I don't know that saying I refuse to go back to this team because they don't have a good quarterback is reading too much into it. I mean, he obviously said the negative version of that statement, which is negative. You know what I mean?
But he walked his own, or he had a more clarification in like that sentence in that same press conference. And the reporter that initially reported that thing, like, kind of walked back the good quarterback thing too. Like, there were just a couple of specific things that Mike Wallace wanted to, have a career that Mike Wallace could be proud of. And the number one thing on that list was a quarterback who can really sling the ball.
Right.
Which apparently is not
so it's still, all of it contains like implicit criticism and stuff like that. And it's very annoying. And, I went off on him. I wasn't that upset. I was a little annoyed, obviously, but like, it's like, well, it's kind of ridiculous because like he was less productive per snap than more than one receiver on the Vikings offense. So to say that, and I'm not saying he said this, but the implication is seemingly that the reason he didn't produce is because of his quarterback. When there was a 4-game stretch where he had 2 catches. So he averaged half a catch per game. And a lot of that is his fault. We talked, a lot more about it, during the season. But yeah,
even
I think,
Matt Miller today was like, why can't the Vikings get somebody who can go up for those contested catches?
Right. Like, yeah, I mean, it would actually be the exact same conversation if Mike Wallace was still in the building. So, yeah, it's annoying. I don't really get angry at players too much anymore, I guess. But yeah, it's and he said I didn't want to say that Teddy Bridgewater wasn't a good quarterback, but I mean fundamentally he kind of said it, and he said it, in terms of what he wants out of a quarterback, like you said. And you'll find a lot of that with Joe Flacco, but I really doubt that he's ever going to find sort of his peak again. And yeah, he did get 10 touchdowns in Miami, but I still find it unlikely that he'll break 800 yards in Baltimore. So he should probably get more yards in Baltimore than he did in Minnesota. So it'll feel like maybe a redemptive process for him and for Ravens fans that were sticking up for him saying that. But point of fact, nearly every statistical and in-depth subjective look at the 2015 season has Teddy ahead of Flacco. You could look at Pro Football Focus grades. Teddy's ahead of Flacco, so that's a subjective look. Yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, adjusted net yards per attempt, passer rating, Teddy's ahead of Flacco. I think it's Key and Fahey's quarterback book, fantastic book. I recommend it. I would also have Teddy ahead of Flacco, although he doesn't really rank the quarterbacks. The way he talks about Teddy, the way he talks about Flacco, it's very clear that Teddy was better than Flacco in 2015 anyway. So, yeah.
Well, and at the end of the day, it seems like Wallace was trying to, or Wallace might actually genuinely believe that it wasn't him, it was the team, when it was probably mostly him that was, getting in the way of his own success.
Yeah, and I thought Wallace was doing pretty well, not just deep, but at every level of the field early in the season, and it just kind of tailed off. And so that, to me, it felt like it was more of a him problem because the rest of his team was producing in a way that he wasn't as the season progressed, and he degraded, I think, subjectively on film and statistically, obviously. So. It is what it is. Screw you, Mike Wallace.
Please don't say that. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
I was watching a lot of Top Chef the other day, so.
Oh God, that's
what happened. That's why. I'm sorry.
Oh, speaking of Top Chef, I ate at a Top Chef winners restaurant tonight up in Boulder. Hosea Rosenberg, the season 3 winner.
Oh, Hosea he cheated on his girlfriend, right?
Yeah, he sure did.
It was the only Top Chef drama that felt real worthy to me in the 5 seasons that I've watched. So that was kind of weird.
Well, but that was before Top Chef was like even more heavily produced.
Right.
Like that may have been one of the last real moments to ever happen.
Yeah. It was the time the dude Cliff, I think, got kicked off the show for assaulting Hare, what's his name? Not Marcus. The molecular gastronomist.
Oh, I can remember his doofy face, and I probably would have punched him too.
Yeah, totally.
Marcel,
that's it.
Yeah, and then Marcel went to do a terrible Netflix series about molecular gastronomy.
Oh, it was so bad.
But as long as he feels good about himself, that's the most important thing.
Sure, whatever you say, Dusty.
Anyway, Hosea has this awesome like New American style restaurant that has a butcher shop attached to it.
Oh, fantastic!
And you can sit at like the chef station, the chef counter, and watch everyone in the kitchen work. You can see the whole grill station. You can see the cold station. They do a bunch of their own sausages, and you can order stuff that was butchered in house, and they'll just like grill it up and put it on a plate, serve it with some roasted garlic and a little bit of chimichurri, and there you go. And then they have a pantheon of other tasty things you can order along with it. But it's just like, my favorite thing about the place is that it's in like a part of Boulder. Like it's shares a building with a Quiznos. And
what?
like, and when you park, like there's a huge Quiznos sign and you have to like go around the side to see the Black Belly Market sign.
That's nuts.
Across the street is like a Wendy's and like a horrible strip mall. It's just like it would be like if there wasn't a
phenomenal restaurants in strip malls and like attached to businesses that I would not really want to eat at unless I was desperate, but still, it always feels weird.
But just like imagine that you were eating at like one of the best restaurants in America on like the outside edge of Edina.
Whew.
Like what am I doing here? And then you go inside and you're like, oh right, I get it. But yeah,
wait, were we talking about the Vikings?
Oh, what is that? Is that what we do here? I suppose we could try. So it seems like we, despite my, consistent argument throughout the season that the reason our offensive line was so terrible is because we were missing two of our starters for like the whole season. We're still attempting to upgrade. We're making moves and trying to change the unit, or at least give the unit more depth. And we talked a little bit about, Andre Smith as a potential pickup last week, but now it's a done deal for 1 year.
Yeah, and I mentioned that the Vikings were probably not going to draft an offensive lineman week 1 because the question is, who would you replace? And then, of course, I was wrong in essence, although not, I guess, technically, so technically right.
Which, as we all know, is the best kind of right.
Right, best kind of right. But it seems like the Vikings are not that concerned about, that kind of question. Although, in fairness, cap space is a liquid asset and a first-round draft pick is not. You get one of them. So it is a little different. But unless, I guess, you're Rick Spielman, in which case you can find ways to get others. But it is a more scarce resource. So maybe that's how the Vikings decided to approach it. As Chris Mawson tweeted out, the Vikings now have 9 players on their offensive line, core that have started 16 games in a season. And he listed them all. So obviously, so Khalil, Boone, Sullivan, Fusco, Lodeholt, Harris, Clemmings, and there's one other that I missed. Oh, Smith, right? It's the person they just signed. So, and many of them have started more than that. In fact, there's 8 that have probably started more than 30 games. So, I guess Berger is started 16 in a season and probably 20 plus games overall. So, obviously there's a lot of experience in the line, and I think that one of the reasons the Vikings offensive line was so bad, obviously, was those injuries. But I think that the Vikings saw that and saw that also as an opportunity to improve because they could believe all of that. They could believe that they've got a top 8 offensive line when everyone's healthy, which they probably don't. But if they believe that, that doesn't preclude them from getting the best depth possible, which doesn't mean that Boone and Smith are going to be playing depth or anything like that. But it does mean that the way the Vikings have organized their line is that it shouldn't be injury-proof, but it should be a lot more resilient to injury than it was because it had those problems, ever since Teddy was a quarterback. So having a resilient offensive line is something the Vikings haven't had in a while. And, regardless of how the starting market breaks down or how the starting 5 end up being, they'll have a pretty resilient line because, there's no offensive line depth in this league. I think a lot of people have agreed. We talked about that on the show numerous times, with guests and without guests. And so if you have Matt Khalil as a backup, I don't think that's bad at all. If you have Phil Lodeholt as a backup, that's a stunningly good backup in my opinion.
Well, and we're talking about having starting quality players in depth positions, which is never a bad spot.
You just don't get that in the NFL. In fact, the Cowboys had that, and they lost it because those guys hit free agency. I think they have it again, but now one of those guys is hitting free agency again, so it doesn't really matter. So if you have depth on the offensive line to the extent that you've got starting quality players, you lose it pretty quickly, and so you kind of want to get it for as long as you can. Obviously, the Vikings are probably going to lose it because Khalil's contract is going to be up, Lodel's contract is going to be up. And I think, Smith's contract is going to be up, so you're probably only going to get
maybe one of the three back.
Probably only one of them. But the situation for 1 year. So it'll be interesting. I'm glad Matt agrees with the idea of having Andre Smith compete with Matt Khalil at left tackle, because it felt like a crazy idea to me. The more I thought about it, the more it makes sense to me, because I don't think you need a separate set of skills at left tackle versus right tackle in the modern NFL. And I think that, maybe 7 years ago, not even 5, but like 7, 10 years ago, it made a lot more sense. Teams were much more willing to run to the right side. Quarterbacks were a little bit worse at, and I remember, because I was doing all of that work on Jared Allen and looking at all of these pass rushers throughout history, from 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000. And one thing I noticed is the blind side was a real thing for quarterbacks. They really were ambushed from the left a lot. That's not true anymore. And because that's not true anymore, you can have these body types that people always thought were right tackle only on the left side. Now, both Lodeholtz and Smith will struggle against speed rushers, and it always feels bad to say, oh, well, both the tackles struggle against speed rushers. But, I mean, I think Matt Khalil was worse against all rushers than Smith is against all rushers, so that doesn't really bother me as much. And so you could have a situation where you've got Andre Smith who's played right tackle for 6 years in the NFL to be a left tackle. You could have, Alex Boone, who has played both right guard and left guard and right tackle, and I think he's played a little left tackle in the NFL, play left guard. I also think that he should compete at left tackle, but that's, weird, and also we still have to figure out guard. I think Fusco and Sullivan should compete at center. I think that Mike Harris and Fusco should compete at right guard. I think Smith and Lodeholtz and Shepard should compete at right tackle. There's a lot of opportunities for the Vikings. They're going to lose a good offensive lineman at the end of camp. There's a lot of opportunities for the Vikings to have not just depth but diversity along the offensive line, make it resilient in a couple of ways.
So, do we have any context or appreciation at this point for Tony Sperano's influence on the offensive line?
Well, we really don't. I mean, he obviously was a big part of recruiting Alex Boone, and I think that to that extent, we probably are beginning to appreciate some of the things that we don't know that he can bring. He was probably a big part in bringing Andre Smith in, but who knows? Maybe it was Manny's. Maybe they took Andre Smith to Amy's Baking Company in Arizona. Who knows? But it'll be interesting to see how having Sperano is going to change things.
All right. I don't know that's pretty much all the Vikings news from the previous week. Should we reapproach the mailbag without Matt?
Yeah, and any questions that seem to be directed at Matt, I will attempt to answer them I'll just answer them as Arif.
Yeah, don't try to ape, and I will try to filter the questions that were specifically for him.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I have one for you.
Okay.
If Matt Miller tried to adopt you, would you let him?
Well, I got to think about this.
I don't have
a great relationship with my parents.
Leaving aside just the hilarious illegality of adopting an adult. Because really all that does is just create more paperwork. You just have to go back and change a bunch of things in your history.
Well, he's obligated to care for me, right?
He's obligated to pay your student loans if you can't.
But is he going to pay the mortgage on this house? Because that's what my dad's doing.
Well, see, now I suddenly wish we had Matt back. Why didn't you ask him this when he was here, telling you about how you were going to bring diversity to Missouri?
I've lived in Missouri, so that's definitely a downside.
So you already brought diversity there for a little while, and they didn't like it, so you left?
Right, it was not a very appreciated enrichment of their culture.
So is that a no?
Well, okay, no. If Matt pays the mortgage to this house, which, by the way, thank you, Dad, I'm very privileged. But I mean, I have to pay him back. But if Matt pays the mortgage of this house, I think, yeah, easily. And then I'll probably have a job at Bleacher Report again. That'd be pretty easy. But I guess favoritism's bad, but I would take advantage of it either way.
Hey, you play by the rules of the game.
That is definitely an indictment of the game.
Well, but if you want to play the game, then you should learn the rules and play by them. Even the unwritten rules. Yeah. All right. Wait, Vikings? Is that what we're doing here? Okay. Here's actually a good question from Matt Nelson at nmat71. After seeing the deal Eric Weddle took, how pissed are you the Vikings didn't even try to match it?
That's a pretty good question, but I'm not that upset. I didn't think the Vikings would be going after Weddle. I'm still curious about what's happening with Reggie Nelson, as I mentioned sort of on that other podcast at Cold Omaha. I still think it's possible. I mean, the Vikings have the cap room for it, especially because the Smith deal was super cheap. They restructured Lodehold. Wallace is gone. They could still go after Reggie Nelson. But I just never saw them going after Weddle, in part because his decline has already kind of started. And that's not to say he's not still extremely good. I mean, he's still probably a top 5 safety. But I didn't have to say the word probably before, and then he was a top 3 safety before that. And so like right now, it's like, Earl Thomas and Harrison Smith and Eric Berry. But yeah, so, and it's not that, the Ravens are paying very little. They're not paying for, a top 5 safety, which is a good deal, but it's just, you see a player on the decline, he's pretty old, and he's only going to help you for maybe 1 or 2 years. If you sign him, he's your starter. If you sign Michael Griffin, he's not necessarily your starter. So I would have liked Eric Weddle. I said this multiple times, but I'm not upset that they didn't get him. It does make it a draft priority, because it's going to be like a 4 or 5 way competition to start at the strong safety spot with Anton Exum, Anthony Harris, Michael Griffin, and maybe Andrew Sandejo. So, and a draft pick. So,
and specifically not Josh Robinson.
Not Josh Robinson. I thought that would have been a great idea, but there's no way he was going to resign. Good luck in Florida. Is it Tampa Bay? Is it Tampa Bay? Never mind. Sorry, Josh. That sucks.
Yeah. Good luck. Enjoy Florida. 2 questions. Corey Strickland at Contract Corey writes, what are your opinions of the Vikings being able to land Sua Cravens and Josh Doxson? And then J Dog Dungan at Josh Dungan 1. Why should the Vikings not draft Sua Cravens?
Okay, so actually this would have been interesting questions for Matt, because I think he's a little bit more familiar with Sua Cravens. Josh Doxson, I'm on board with. I called him a second rounder. I called him a high second rounder in my scouting report, but I did say I would move him up if he had a good combine and a pro day. And while I think that his combine is getting a little overhyped, it obviously was very good. So I wouldn't mind getting Doxson. I still think he'd be probably overdrafted at 23, but not to the extent that I'd be upset with it. Like, I wasn't upset when the Vikings traded for Cordero Patterson, but neither did I think it was an amazing deal. Obviously, in retrospect, it was a bad deal. But at the time, I thought that, Patterson's value was commensurate with what the Vikings got. If the Vikings drafted Josh Doxson, I would say that that's not great value, but I also wouldn't be upset, and I'd be very excited. So that's fine. As for Sua Cravens, I just haven't watched a bunch of them, but a bunch of people I respect are pretty down on him. A lot of it is he could probably succeed in like a Cam Chancellor role. There's actually not that many Cam Chancellor roles in the NFL. There's Cam Chancellor, and there's maybe roles for that kind of player in Jacksonville and Atlanta, and that's about it. Because it's a pretty unique way to run the cover 3. So I think that he could probably be a good fit in that system, but I don't think that he's a linebacker really. And it's not that I have like this bias against light linebackers. I obviously don't. I've written a couple of articles about why I can get on board with light linebackers. Telvin Smith is a fantastic example of a really light linebacker who's doing really well. But I think that the lighter you are, the more explosive that you need to be, and the more that you need to display some of the advantages that comes with not having that much bulk attached to you. And beyond that, you need to do a pretty good job of playing above your weight when it comes to the run game. Smith does that, Kendricks does that. He's not even that light, but Kendricks does that. Emmanuel Lamore does that, although I still think that he's more a depth player than a starting player. And I think that Cravens is along those lines. I think that he's not explosive enough. And again, this is more based off of the opinions I've culled from people I respect than it is stuff that I've directly watched. So when I say I think, I've gathered that he's not explosive enough, that he's not physical enough in the run game. He doesn't react quickly enough to be a linebacker, and as a safety, he's a little bit too slow. So those are the issues with Sue Cravens. So, but I mean, I could watch him and I could change my mind on him pretty quickly. So we'll see.
All right. Question from me. Have you seen any episodes of The Big Picture with Kal Penn? It's on Netflix and National Geographic Channel.
Yeah, I watched 3 or 4 episodes. I don't know. I really like Kal Penn a lot, mostly because of the namesake. The show is like... It just doesn't click for me. It's interesting, and I'll watch it. Like, that's why I watched 3 episodes instead of just 1. I'll probably watch more.
Okay, so he looks really goofy in the sweater. Like whatever his wardrobe design is doing is not working for me. He doesn't have the gravitas to be able to pull off the poofy sweater with the
collar. That might be it. That might be my issue. Because he's speaking with a bunch of gravitas, but he doesn't have it.
But exactly. He's just like a 30-year-old guy wearing college professor clothes.
He is a professor.
Wow. He doesn't look like a professor.
No, I agree. That's a big part of it.
Okay, but I had a real point to make. Did you watch the one about quote-unquote sports?
No. I'm probably not going to like it.
So, there was one very interesting... Well, okay, so like all episodes of The Big Picture, 1/3 of it is interesting and 2/3 of it is boring and crap.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good summary.
But the 1/3 of this sports episode that was interesting was about how Louisiana generates more college and professional football players per capita than any other state. And they went into a couple of details. They looked at a couple of high schools, like St. Charles's Parish and one other one. I can't remember it. I tried to Google it really quickly, but believe it or not, the show is not popular enough to be easily Googleable. But at any rate, the argument is that there are these players that get scouted starting in high school, and they're scouted because the big colleges in Louisiana and Alabama are all along the same highways as these high schools. It's just physically easy.
That's fascinating.
For coaches to visit these places and see these players and be like, I want that guy to come play at Bama or
LSU
or to a lesser extent like Florida State or TCU. But these schools that have fairly elite football programs that are in kind of the heart of American football country are also very conveniently located for scouts, and that convenience leads to them being more heavily scouted and thus more heavily drafted than players from other places.
And then also people move to that parish because they see that these programs are getting all these people into these colleges, and so these elite football players will then move in.
Okay, but keep in mind this is like Louisiana, like Bayou, Louisiana. So I imagine that a lot of these
other parts of Louisiana and Arkansas and stuff. Man, I'm not I'm packing my bags from Charlotte.
Well, no, but I'm just saying that a lot of people in that part of the country probably can't afford to move anywhere else.
Oh, fair enough. Gotcha.
But I mostly wanted to. I actually had really hoped that you had seen it because I wanted to get your opinion on how much that is an actual thing. But,
it's totally a thing. And it was obviously more of a thing a while back. But no, teams do a better job of drafting in their own backyard. Some of that is a pride thing. Some of that's just there's a hidden gem from say Minnesota Mankato. I'm not going to be the team that misses out on this person. So some of that is not quite the same thing. But yeah, this is definitely a thing. Teams are just getting into designing better routes for their scouts, because scouts are on the road 280 days a year. and they drive, right? So teams are just getting into designing and using analytics to design better routes for their scouts to drive along to give them more downtime, to make them more effective, and to get them to more schools. And so some schools are just much easier to get to. And because of that, it's much easier to get a more complete evaluation. And if you don't see a player, you're just much more likely to. Or if you see a player when you're in a bad mood, or if you see a player with limited film, you're just more likely to be skeptical of them, or more likely to not grade them as highly. So sometimes it's not about FCS or FBS or a Power 5 conference. Sometimes it's just, it's literally easier for me to get to Rutgers than Maryland.
So is that why Vermont has 0 NFL players?
Yeah, that's the reason.
with total earnestness and no snark. All right, so this was an idea that I don't know much about that I think is interesting, and maybe you can explain a little bit about what this question is about and then answer it. Justin M. Rubin writes us, do you believe in the basketball team idea for a wide receiver core? If so, what types do the Vikings need?
Yeah, so I saw that question and I stole it, and I used that term to talk to Miller about Dachshund. So Ruben, you get credit for that. But no, I don't actually, because I've heard, sometimes, or I heard this phrase maybe 2-3 weeks ago. If I'm looking to grade a team's wide receiver core, or if I want to know who's going to win, who has the best basketball team? And it's in like all things that sound really cool, it's very simplistic and it's not immediately wrong. And so it's appealing, right? But no, I don't think so, because I think Corey Coleman would probably be a middling basketball player, but he's a very exciting, college player who I think can probably translate well to the NFL. I obviously, more concerns about his potential to translate than I do someone like Michael Thomas. But I think that, Thomas is probably not a great basketball player because he's okay at contested catches, which would make him probably okay at competing for a rebound. Also, when you think about it, basketball players are like anywhere between, at least post players, are anywhere between, 6'5" and 6'10". How many receivers? It's like Kelvin Benjamin and Alshon Jeffrey, and that's kind of it. So they're all bad basketball players. But if they're all playing against each other, I still think that it allows you to miss on like Wes Welker and Tavon Austin, who was pretty decent last year. You probably miss Odell Beckham despite his leaping ability, and you probably miss a lot of receivers who are quite good. Because of what that creates a bias for players who have maybe not large catching radiuses, but they can jump pretty high because either they're tall or they're explosive. So it's good, but I think that there are other simplistic ways to look at receivers that are better.
Wait, so the entire idea is you just want to draft a wide receiver core that would be good at basketball?
It'll be better than the other wide receiver cores at basketball.
All right. Logan Reed sends us a question by email. My suspicion is that he sent it to us before the Andre Smith deal was announced, because the question is, who do you see as a left tackle who could replace Matt Khalil next year? Although he goes on to say, but could be available at second round or later pick. So maybe it's draft specific.
Yeah, it's draft. I think it's probably draft specific. I don't think most people are thinking Andre Smith is a left tackle. So I think that's an unusual idea that I want to see come to fruition than it is an idea that the Vikings are actually having. I think the Vikings will probably only have him compete at right tackle, and that certainty I have about what their thoughts are has already upset me, despite there being no evidence one way or the other. Although I think there was an Albert Breer tweet saying that Andre Smith would compete with Lodeholt at right tackle. I don't know if that was sourced or if that was just him thinking the things that he thinks. As for prospects at tackle in the NFL, there's actually a lot. I don't think that this is a particularly good draft compared to some of the past classes in terms of tackle prospects. And it really depends on if you're thinking short-term or long-term. So if you're thinking short-term, you're probably looking at someone like Ronnie Stanley, who's probably not going to be there at 23. unless someone like LaRaven Clark, who is basically the left tackle version of TJ Clemmings, very raw, but physically everything's there for him. So I think that probably this is kind of a short-termish question, in which case you probably want someone like Kyle Murphy from Stanford. I hear good things about Cole Toner from Harvard, although I don't know if he is raw or not. You tend to look at a small school like Harvard and think that they're raw. But in terms of like polish, there's just not that many. In terms of people who can provide a lot of long-term benefit, I think that Jason Spriggs is probably underrated. You could probably find him in the second round. Sean Coleman is probably a really interesting prospect. He's from Auburn. You could probably find him in the second or third round. And if you're thinking pretty long-term, then LaRaven Clark, you'd have to basically build him back up again. He would be an interesting left tackle prospect as well.
J-Dog Dungan returns at Josh Dungan 1. Why is Sheldon Rankins the perfect defensive tackle for the Vikings?
A lot of people kind of want to draft a defensive tackle, and part of it's because you don't want to miss out on a good class like this one. But abstractly, he would obviously be fantastic to have. In terms of the amount of investment it would take for the Vikings to get him, I don't think that I don't think the Vikings should do that. But if they got him for like free, or they just got him for the cost of whatever his contract should be, that'd be totally awesome. I mean, he's very explosive. He's one of the few, I think, defensive tackles in this class that plays with both agility and explosion. And that's kind of a weird thing to say about a class that's being, so, I shouldn't say hyped, because that kind of like makes me say that they're overhyped, and they're not. It's a very good class. But usually, they're one or the other. So, for example, Andrew Billings plays really stiff. He could probably only play as nose tackle. Jerron Reed, same kind of thing. Kimdiche, you kind of want to figure out where you want to play him. If you want to play him on the edge, if you want to play him at 3 technique, I think that he has issues in terms of, when he's doubled and, run defense and stuff like that. So he's explosive at times, and then his strength doesn't show up at other times. Sheldon Rankins doesn't have those problems. He's explosive. He is flexible. He can get to the passer. He can stop the run. Basically what you want out of a defensive tackle. He's a Louisville alum, so he could hang out with Teddy and DeBose, BJ DeBose. That would be fun, I'm sure. That's my answer.
That's satisfactory. So maybe not perfect. Don't believe the hype.
Again, perfect in the abstract.
Well, in theory, communism works.
Thanks, Dusty.
Alex Goebel at Ulayron writes us, does Teddy have to improve his deep ball to take the quote-unquote next step, or is there something else?
Well, Matt thinks so. And Matt thinks that it is improvable. I think that, a lot of it can be improved just from...
Well, and leaving aside like the whole Teddy couldn't throw because there was no line there defending him.
Right. He struggled even after taking that into account, but probably improved just because there's a reasonable expectation the offensive line will improve even at the deep ball. I don't think that he necessarily has to improve at the deep ball to take the next step, but if he does not improve at the deep ball, he has to improve at a lot of other things that he's already kind of good at in order to take the next step. Because you want him to be more, 2013 Peyton Manning than you want him to be, 2014 Alex Smith, right? Like those are like if you don't improve at the deep ball, those are like potentially sort of the 2 career arcs that you want to take, and you want him to take the one that got like 50 touchdowns.
I think everybody would like to be 2013 Peyton Manning. I think you would agree with me that literally no one else could.
But. Right, but my point is that, and he's not the only one. I mean, there are times throughout Brady's career where his deep ball was kind of meh.
Like the first time he won a Super Bowl, just sort of fell ass backwards into it.
The first 3 times.
Well said.
But yeah. So like, I think that in terms of the amount of resources, like mental energy or reps or whatever, it's more efficient to invest in just getting better at the deep ball. But he doesn't have to, and I think that if you improve your anticipation, which I think is already pretty good, and he improves his ability to call protections, deal with all this other stuff, improves pre-snap reads, moves off of progressions faster, has a slightly better throwing motion, all those things, all things that he's probably working on anyway. I think that he could take the next step and be a legitimately Pro Bowl quality quarterback instead of a quarterback who kind of slid backwards into the Pro Bowl.
Be one of the players from a team that did not go deep in the playoffs that ends up playing in the Pro Bowl anyway.
Yeah, but be the kind of player that turns down the Pro Bowl invite instead of leaps at it.
No, I got the playoffs to get ready for, son. I can't be worried about hurting myself the week before the Super Bowl. I got actual work to do. Matt Fraser writes us at Fraser Matt D. Do you see the Vikings drafting a quarterback in mid to late rounds, assuming that Sean Hill is not returning? If so, who?
Oh, is Sean Hill a free agent? Yeah, he might be a free agent. Well, either way. Yeah, I think probably the later rounds. There's been a lot of quarterback talk in this class because a lot of people are trying to find answers that are not, the ones that we have, right? Because people are not very happy.
There's a lot of trash starting quarterbacks out there.
Yeah, and a lot of uncertainty in the top of the draft. So there's been a lot of talk about, players like Brandon Allen and Dak Prescott and even Cardale Jones. And it's kind of interesting. So, like, there's a lot of disagreement about Kevin Hogan because he's got some really bad games. He's got some really good games. The thing that makes him special is supposed to be his brain. And he's got a decent arm, but it's just sometimes he's just really bad. But he'd be interesting just because as a backup, having the ability to manage games and the ability to help the quarterback prep for games and stuff like that as a backup, that could be really valuable. But as someone who could change the game as soon as he enters, maybe Brandon Allen from Arkansas, would be the kind of person that you want. I think that Jacoby Brissett from NC State might be the most interesting out of all of these late round guys. But maybe the most undervalued out of all of them is Vernon Adams, who played with accuracy, played with poise in the pocket, and he generally made some good decisions. And those, like, if you wanted to create a 3-step checklist for a quarterback, those are your three checklists. Now, he doesn't have the build, right? He's 5'11". But whatever. I think that he's probably my favorite out of them, and I think that the Vikings should probably consider drafting, Brissett or Hogan or Coker or Adams or one of those people in the mid to late rounds, because I think Sean Hill. We saw what happens when he backs up, and I think he's no longer who he was, and who he was wasn't that great.
Like, we should be starting to think about how quickly we can move on from him and find at least one warm body that can facilitate that, right?
Right, and then you could have a competition between Taylor Heineke, who a lot of people seem to like a lot, and the other undersized quarterback, Vernon Adams, or, whoever. It'd be a really small quarterback core if it was Vernon Adams and Taylor Heineke and Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy would be the biggest by a reasonable margin.
A dwarf among midgets. Have you seen the video of John Gruden hitting Carson Wentz with a pool noodle?
Yes, amazing. It's like a very Gruden moment.
Well, yeah, and the genesis of that moment, right?
Would it
the pool noodle thing?
No, tell me.
This is great. This is epic callback. So the pool noodle thing was a training device designed by the New York Jets offensive coordinator after the butt fumble.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Look, I read it on Wikipedia. It must be true. But
that's Wow.
So they designed this drill where the quarterback has to do like quarterback stuff while people hit him with a pool noodle, or running backs have to do running back stuff while he gets hit with a pool noodle, because they're trying to simulate situations where your brain goes wrong because the play goes wrong, and the idea is to prevent trying to hand the ball off the wrong way into someone's butt and then give up a fumble for a touchdown.
That is... I sympathize with the idea and effort.
It's, right? Like I like that I like that they're not doing nothing about the butt fumble.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know if this is the best thing they could do.
I thought it was just like dealing with distractions, because like that's what being hit with a pool noodle would be, right?
Oh, yeah, and basically that's what you're getting at. When if a play breaks down, if you're fucked up because John Gruden's hitting you in the head with a pool noodle, like how are you going to deal with that? And
it's minor. It's annoying. Like it's what they should do. Have you seen I Heart Huckabees?
Yes. Okay,
so I think it's an underrated movie. A lot of other people think it's pretentious. It is, but it's still very good.
Pretentious
that scene
can still be good.
Where they want to experience nothing, so they keep on hitting themselves in the face of the ball. Right? You should do that. You should just throw giant rubber balls at their heads so they experience nothing in the middle of a play.
Well, I imagine that the discussion in the offices at the Jets training facility were something like that. Then they were like, no, we might actually like hurt someone. We might like break somebody's nose. It should probably be something a little less, like something that we can like still wield from a distance, so we're not like affecting the play, but something a little less hurtful. Maybe like a wand or a pool noodle or something. Like,
well, they shouldn't have like McLeod Bethel Thompson hurl a dodgeball at their face, but
oh, you mean John Balthazar, McLeod Bethel Thompson?
McLeod, John Balthazar, Bethel Thompson. Yeah, but I mean, they're probably not at too much of a liability if you just have some random athletic trainer throw a ball at their face.
Well, and what kills me about this whole thing is like the reason the butt fumble happened was because the center was supposed to turn left and the ball was handed off right, or the center was supposed to turn right and the ball was handed off left. It was they just got themselves backwards. Why don't you just rehearse the plays more? Why
I'm sure they thought of that.
Well, we've already rehearsed the play 20 times and that didn't work.
Right, so pool noodle, plan B. Obviously, the next step is pool noodles.
You break the glass and there's a pool noodle in there.
Case of emergency.
Exactly. And not only did we get the butt fumble itself out of this, but we got this hilarious, like, I guess, training device that led to John Gruden hitting Carson Wentz with a pool noodle, which is an amazing video. If you haven't watched it,
it's a fantastic video.
It'll brighten your day.
We'll probably have it in the show notes.
All right. A couple more questions, and then we'll call it a show.
Sounds good.
All right. Judd Zolgad's hoodie. Would Ezekiel Elliott fit the Vikings offense better than Adrian Peterson? This was a question that was specifically addressed to Matt, so you'll have to put your Matt Miller hat on for this one.
Oh, I think Matt would agree. I think Matt has commented a couple of times about Adrian's issues running out of the gun, which is still kind of a weird thing to say because they're always at pistol depth and not at shotgun depth, but it doesn't really matter because it's the same steps. He has to take lateral steps instead of downhill steps. And I think Matt Miller would also agree, Ezekiel Elliott, while maybe not the best running back prospect of all time or anything like that, is good at everything. If you have like a set of categories for what you want your running back to be able to do, pass protection, yards between the tackles, yards on the outside, the ability to catch the ball, all those things, he's good at all of them. He's probably the most well-rounded running back prospect we've seen in a long, long time. He's just not like as explosive as Todd Gurley or whatever. So yeah, I think he would. I think Ezekiel year one will have a better year than Adrian Peterson year, was it 9, 10? Year 9. It has to be year 9. It's 2016. He was drafted in 2007. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, sure. And I'm sorry to encourage Judd Zilgan's hoodie like that.
That's okay. I think we've been encouraging him a little too much during this episode, but that's fine. Well, I say that, and then I have one more question from him before we wrap up.
Fantastic.
Your thoughts on Braxton Miller? Have you cooled off on him since Senior Bowl? Would he fit in Minnesota?
I have actually cooled off on him since the Senior Bowl. I was able to watch a little bit of him while I was watching Mike Thomas. I haven't watched a ton of Braxton Miller aside from that, but it's just it just feels like trying the Cordero experiment again. He doesn't have a bunch of experience at wide receiver. He's extremely athletic, obviously around 4.28 or something at the Ohio State Pro Day. A lot of people talk about the Ohio State Pro Day like, they always run fast or whatever. And it's like true, but I don't think it's a less true. I think that still you're more likely to get more true times anyway if you choose a player's fastest time, even if you got a situation where you've got a fast turf like the Ohio State Pro Day. But, gifted athlete, about the same size as Cordero. That is electric in terms of his college, highlights as Cordero. He's actually probably more raw than even Patterson was coming out. And sometimes it's just like little things. It's like, which side of his shoulder when he looks for the ball. And that can affect a lot of things because it changes your steps and it causes incompletions and it causes the ability for you to lose the ball and stuff like that. And when it's just like basic stuff, like where to look for the ball, there's so much you have to do. So yeah, I've cooled off on him. If the Vikings draft like a Michael Thomas or a Josh Doctson or Laquan Treadwell in round 1 or at the top of round 2 or whatever, I'm not against drafting Braxton Miller in the middle or late rounds, but like to me, he's clearly like the second of 2 receivers that you draft in this draft if you draft him.
Well, all right. And that will conclude our second mailbag in the same episode. This time with 100% less Matt Miller. And
oh no. 100% Matt Miller free. Slap that on the box.
Matt Miller free. Oh, no one wants that. Thanks to our guest, Matt. He was amazing. You can follow him at NFL Draft Scout on Twitter. Make sure you check out his NFL Top 400 as he mentioned on his way out the door. Of course, follow Arif on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Follow me at Dusty O'Connell. Follow the show at Norse Code DN, and feel free to tweet us your questions throughout the week so that we can call them and then create the best possible mailbag to answer for you, our listeners, without whom the show would not be possible. This is normally where I would say go to NorseCodePodcast.com to give us money if you feel like the show is worth anything. But regrettably, we're having some technical issues with the website. So please visit DailyNorseman.com, as I'm sure you all do already, because you're good Norse Code listeners and we tell you to do that, so you do it. But the show page for the podcast on Daily Norseman will have links to our Patreon page and maybe a PayPal link as well, so that if you feel like this show is worth, maybe $3.50 to you, the price of a Oprah chai latte. Oprah has her own brand of chai at Starbucks. That's power.
Oh, I thought you just made that up. What?
No, that's a real thing.
You just threw some words together.
Nope, Oprah chai.
Huh. Would it be any good?
It's fine.
Do you think? You had it?
It's not as good as the original chai, and I think that Starbucks has worse chai than pretty much any local coffee shop. I feel like chai is one of those things where the smaller the shop that sells it, the better quality it'll be, like the spicier it'll be or whatever. And Starbucks chai is made to be inoffensive, just like Oprah.
The first coffee drink I ever had was a chai. I had it at Caribou, which means it was better than at Starbucks. Although, turns out the best chais are always the ones in like local coffee shops, people like trying to be hipster or whatever. Not because they necessarily always produce better coffee drinks. They just have better chais because they just want to make you taste the chai part of it. But yeah, going from a Caribou chai to a Starbucks chai was like very disappointing.
So if you think that this show is worth more than a garbage Starbucks chai,
Garbage.
Please click the link at the bottom of the show page. You will also find show notes with links to stuff we referenced on the show, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks to the Daily Norseman for putting up with us through now 3 complete football seasons. I actually was talking about this show to a random person the other day, and I was like, oh my God, we're about to start season 4. What is wrong with us?
That's nuts. How do we survive?
I know, I especially like given who was left in charge of this enterprise. Like, good Lord.
Wait, is it you or James? Are you talking about yourself or James?
Well, me and you and him.
I'm not in charge. Don't you put that on me.
Well, just the fact that the 3 of us together could do anything that lasted this long is a minor miracle in itself. So
yeah, I think everybody who knows this is pretty surprised.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to see your brother again. Be like, yeah, so we're still doing the podcast. And be like, really? That's the only thing he's successfully done this long other than college, I imagine is what he'll say.
I mean, that assumes I've been successful at college. I don't think he would say that. I think he would choose other than, and then he would struggle for a little while, and then he would kind of just tail off.
He would just kind of like purse his lips and look at me like, no.
So yeah.
That I think will do it for. Oh no, our Facebook page, facebook.com/Daily Norseman, contains links that we either have talked about, will talk about, may not talk about on the show that are just extra stuff. But please like the page. Facebook keeps promising us bonuses if we get more likes. So let's get that ticker up higher. Norse Code Posse.
Excited to hear about these bonuses.
Yeah, me too. We only need like 70 more likes to get the next one. So.
Wow.
And they won't tell me what it is.
What?
It's
like a free massage?
It's probably like a Oprah chai latte or something.
Yeah, curses.
I know, something I don't even want. Yeah. Well, do we have, I guess we don't really have anything necessarily planned for next week other than the universal truth that there will be a show.
Yeah, I'll probably get a good guest. I'll go through my good guest portfolio instead of my random guest portfolio.
Exactly. This is what you get when you become a contributing member of Norse Code, a commitment to good guests instead of random ones.
Right.
It's an important thing to have. That's going to do it for this week's Norse Code. We will be back for episode 125 next week with a good guest, maybe a random one, maybe no guest at all. You'll have to tune in and find out. But until then, our formula is and shall remain, keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.